You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. Direct from the Vero Essin Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology, and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
The Son of Man, Who Was He? This article is by Bruce Chilton, and it comes to us via Bible Review of August 1996. Who is the Son of Man? And who is the one like a Son of Man? And who is the Son of Man, in capital letters? What's the difference in meaning from one phrase to the other? And how do these terms apply to Yeshua? Until quite recently, it was widely agreed that the Gospels referred to Jesus as the Son of Man simply to identify him as the Messiah. However, today, some scholars vigorously deny that Jesus used the phrase to make any theological claim about himself at all. Instead, they say the phrase simply refers to any human being, one person among others. The battle is on between those who see the phrase as messianic, the Son of Man in capitals, and those who see the phrase as general, the Son of Man in lowercase. General readers and specialists alike can ask the same question that crowds ask in John 12:34, who is this Son of Man? And there's no dearth of literature on the subject. Harvard's online catalog lists some 72 books, not to mention articles, that are primarily dedicated to this subject. Actually, the disagreement is even more complicated than I've just suggested because the Son of Man sometimes refers not just to Jesus, but also to another heavenly being at the right hand of Elohim. For simplicity's sake, we might note three general designations within the literature of Israel and the early church. Number 1, the generic Son of Man, an ordinary human being. Number 2, the angelic one, like a Son of Man. And number 3, the Messianic Son of Man. The question is, which of these designations is on Jesus' mind when he speaks of the Son of Man in the Gospels? In the Synoptic Gospels, that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is the only person who uses the phrase. Indeed, he uses the phrase more often than any other, including Son of God and Messiah, to explain who he is. This perhaps explains why the scholarly debate has been so heated, for the issue raises questions at the core of Christian faith, whether Jesus saw himself as an exceptional figure or as just one example of humanity at large. Did he use the term generically, referring to his human nature, or angelically, to explain his access to the divine, or messianically, to claim that he was the Son of Elohim? Three kinds of sayings in the Synoptic Gospels associate Jesus with the Son of Man. Note that I said associate. This doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus, in every instance, says that he is the Son of Man. One group of references in the Synoptic Gospels relates to the way people treat the Son of Man, typically without respect. And although he suffers, he will be vindicated. A second group speaks of the Son of Man's authority, for example, to forgive sins. With these references, we should classify sayings that insist upon the Son of Man's divine mission. A third group refers to the Son of Man's triumphant arrival as eschatological Redeemer, to sit in judgment at the end of all things. All this shows that the Son of Man has a very wide range of meanings. Moreover, the term could easily mean different things at different times. Jesus' sayings, as we have them in the Gospels, were generated within the Jesus movement, sometime between that movement's beginnings in Galilee and the production of the Gospels by Greco-Roman congregations. During that period of the middle-late 1st century A.D., the term's meanings developed and changed. Use of Son of Man as a generic term is widespread, not only in contemporaneous Aramaic sources, but much earlier in the Hebrew Bible as well. Consider, for example, these verses from Psalm 8. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you have regard for him? The psalmist obviously includes himself in the category of human beings for whom God's care comes as a miracle. The psalmist is not talking about himself alone, however, but of people in general. There can be no doubt that Jesus too used this common Aramaic idiom, the Son of Man, in its usual generic sense. For example, in Matthew 8:20, Luke 9:58, and in the Gospel of Thomas 86, the foxes have holes and the birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In context, the saying applies not simply to Jesus, but also to the homeless disciples, and it carries with it a resonant sympathy for all homeless people. The Son of Man here cannot mean me, myself, I, and no one else. Others are included with the speaker, as in Psalm 8. A passage in the book of Daniel provides background for a significantly different usage of the phrase Son of Man in the New Testament. The book of Daniel, which was written about 168 BC, is unlike any other book of the Hebrew Bible in its combination of apocalyptic visions, belief in resurrection, and angelic interpreters. Daniel 7:13 and 14 provide the bedrock for understanding the angelic use of the Son of Man concept. In this passage, one like a Son of Man is clearly the agent of final judgment. This being is not human, yet is like a human, like a Son of Man. I watched in the visions of the night, and behold, with clouds of heaven, one like a Son of Man was coming, and he approached the Ancient of Days, and they presented him before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Here, an angelic figure is said to be like a Son of Man, in the sense of like a human being. In fact, some recent translations of the Bible, such as the New Revised Standard Version and the New Jewish Publication Society translation, render the phrase like a human being instead of like a Son of Man. In short, the agent of final judgment is an angelic being in the heavenly court, but is like a human being. Some human qualities ascribed to the figure to whom an everlasting dominion is given. This visionary passage forms the literary heart of the book of Daniel. The kingdoms of the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the beast of the terrible horns are all to fall, according to Daniel 7. The probable reference is to the Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian empires, followed by the multiple horns of Alexander the Great and his successors. The one like a Son of Man, Israel's heavenly counterpart of the beasts, is alone to receive a kingdom that will stand forever. After receiving his vision, Daniel seeks interpretation from one of the angels in the heavenly court, who are constantly at the ready to serve the Ancient of Days. This angel is one of the several who have just presented the one like a Son of Man at the divine throne, and he is therefore in an ideal position to know the significance of the vision. Daniel is told that the four beasts are four kings, and that when the one like the Son of Man is presented to the Ancient of Days, the saints, or holy ones, of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever. That's Daniel 7:17 and following. In this vision, the angels of the previous kingdoms are beasts. The angel of the final kingdom, however, is one like a Son of Man. This angelic figure in the heavenly court is to be guarantor of the rule of the saints, or holy ones, of the Most High. The final chapter of Daniel refers explicitly to the resurrection, the clearest reference in the Hebrew Bible. When the archangel Michael arises from his place in the heavenly court, quote, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Daniel 12:1 and 2. In the book of Daniel, taken as a whole, the one like the Son of Man is clearly identified as being like Michael, the messianic and angelic redeemer of Israel. The concept of the Son of Man, as used in Daniel, was certainly in the air when Jesus uses the term, and a fortiori when the New Testament was composed. This is less clear with respect to the reference to the Son of Man in the book of Enoch, an apocryphal work whose date of composition is a matter of dispute. Parts of the book have been reliably dated as early as Daniel. Aramaic fragments of Enoch from the 2nd century BC have been identified among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Indeed, the origins of the book are much earlier. But the Qumran fragments do not include any passages referring to the Son of Man. Those parts of the book, some scholars say, might have been added later. And as an aside, that is because that particular section, the parable section of Enoch, no fragments have ever been found of that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like Daniel, Enoch contains apocalyptic visions and describes the Son of Man. For some in the early church, the book of Enoch was probably considered scripture. It's quoted, for example, in the New Testament letter of Jude. The Son of Man in Enoch refers to a prominent figure in the heavenly court who holds a privileged position near the throne of Elohim. As Enoch describes in one of his visions, "At that place I saw the one to whom belongs the time before time, and his head was white like wool, and there was before him another individual, whose face was like that of a human being. His countenance was full of grace like that of one among the holy angels. And I asked the one from among the angels who was going with me, 'Who is this?' And he answered me and said to me, 'This is the Son of Man to whom belongs righteousness, and with whom righteousness dwells. And he will open all the hidden storerooms. For the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and he is destined to be victorious before the Lord of spirits in eternal uprightness. The Son of Man, whom you have seen, is the one who will remove the kings and the mighty ones from their comfortable seats, and the strong ones from their thrones." Enoch 46, 1-4. The imagery in this passage from Enoch develops what we have already seen in Daniel. Another reference to the Son of Man influenced by Daniel in the book of Revelation, sometimes called the Apocalypse, is obviously post-resurrection. That is, it conveys the glory of Jesus in the light of faith in his resurrection. John, the supposed author of Revelation, sees one like a Son of Man in a vision of utmost clarity. "I saw one like a Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash across his chest. His head and his hair were white as white wool, white as snow. His eyes were like flames of fire. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he placed his right hand on me, saying, 'Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, and the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever and ever.'" That's Revelation chapter 1, 12-18. The description is clearly a way of depicting Jesus after his resurrection by speaking of his heavenly status in terms borrowed from Daniel 7, and perhaps Enoch. But that doesn't tell us much about how Jesus himself used the phrase. Nevertheless, the evidence of Daniel, Enoch, and Revelation demonstrates that some people thought Elohim's final judgment would be accomplished through one like a Son of Man. Enoch shows that this figure may simply have been called the Son of Man. Just such a figure of final judgment is meant when Jesus warns his hearers in the following well-known saying from Mark 8, "Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with his holy angels." Here, Jesus himself is using the image of the Son of Man in much the same way as Daniel and Enoch. The Son of Man, he says, will finally and definitely and definitively insist upon the truth of Jesus' teachings. But this is also important to emphasize that Jesus is here differentiating himself from the Son of Man. This is even clearer in the different form of the saying preserved in Luke 12, 8-9. "Every one who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of Elohim." This saying of Yahshua is quite early. It was probably part of the early collection of Yahshua's sayings known as Q. The parallel but different form in Matthew is preserved in Matthew 10:32. Similarly, the saying in Mark 8:38 derived from Peter that, like Q, circulated around the year 35. In short, the saying is attested in the 3 synoptic Gospels as well as in sources that take us back to within a few years of the crucifixion. The great German theologian Rudolf Bultmann insightfully noted that not only does Jesus refer to himself and to the Son of Man as distinct figures, but that the Son of Man provides divine confirmation of Jesus' own teaching, as in Daniel, where the Son of Man will establish Elohim's approval of Israel. When Jesus refers to the Son of Man in this way, he's thinking not simply of himself, but mainly of the figure in the heavenly court as described principally in Daniel. and I might add, and better, in Enoch. Yeshua says insistently that the Son of Man, the angelic figure, will vindicate his own teaching. If this is so clearly Yeshua's understanding of the Son of Man, why is there any doubt about his meaning? And how did the variant meanings of the suffering, authoritative, and triumphant, in short, the Messianic Son of Man, develop? We are again faced with the old dilemma that has haunted the discussion for so long. The angelic, not to say the messianic, meaning leaves the generic references unexplained. Equal unsatisfactory is the solution that reduces the generic sayings to banal truisms while dismissing all the messianic sayings as Christian inventions. If one of these solutions, or one of their many variations, correspond with the chronological evolution of the traditions within the Gospels, that would lend it some support. But both the generic and the angelic uses are early. Moreover, both lose currency after the period of the New Testament. Indeed, how often do we refer to Yeshua as the Son of Man? That term is still so little understood, even by the people who believe in him, that we, as teachers, need to know how to define it. For most critical scholars, Jesus was a rational teacher who wished to convey a single, prosaic meaning. The current debate is between conservatives, who want to see the Son of Man as only messianic, and liberals, who want to see him as only generic. In fact, both groups adhere to the 19th century liberal presupposition of rationality as the primary motivation in human affairs. Their disagreement is a sideshow compared with the basic question. If we make the liberal assumption that he was rational by our standards, can we understand Yeshua at all? The sayings concerning the Son of Man answer that question clearly. We simply cannot understand them if we assume Jesus' meaning was prosaic. The passage in John 12:34, where the crowd expresses its exasperation, and perhaps ours, actually points to the need to see Jesus' usage as more than prosaic, more than generic. When he speaks of the exaltation of the Son of Man, the crowd replies impatiently, "We have heard from the law that the Messiah lives forever, and how do you say that the Son of Man must be exalted? Who is this, the Son of Man?" You see, the crowd understands both terms, Messiah and Son of Man, and for that reason is baffled by the notion of a messianic Son of Man. The passage in John's Gospel shows us what is difficult to grasp about the Son of Man and how to get over our confusion. The crowd assumes, as do liberal critics, that the Son of Man must be either generic or messianic, whereas Yeshua uses the phrase multidimensionally. He operates in the realm of poetry, not of prose. For he was a master of the parable, the comparison, matla in Aramaic. Analogical or comparative speech was his particular strength. He could portray the kingdom of Elohim in terms of a growing seed, a woman making bread, or a merchant out to close an attractive deal. The point of his parables was that you could understand the kingdom in terms of such realities, and that such ordinary activities found their true meanings in the reality of the kingdom. Amen. One of Yeshua's characteristic activities was to participate in communal meals, and those meals were themselves enacted parables, celebrations of the festivity of the kingdom of Elohim. Basic human activities, for him, were intimately connected with the ultimate kingdom of Elohim. That was the theme of his ministry. He defined the purity of Israel in terms of people's readiness to respond to the opportunities of the kingdom. That's worth 2 amens. If we appreciate that Yeshua genuinely related his own activity and the activities of those around him to the kingdom of Elohim, then we are in a position to appreciate his sayings concerning the Son of Man. Who can have insight into the ways of the divine king seated upon his heavenly throne? To anyone who took Daniel 7 seriously as a depiction of that throne, the answer would be that the angelic Son of Man of that vision provides access to the mystery of the divine kingship. When Yeshua preached that the kingdom of Elohim was celebrated by his ministry, He claimed to have an insight into the ways of heaven. That insight, Yeshua went on to claim, will be warranted by the Son of Man in heaven, quote, when he comes in his Father's glory with his holy angels. Mark 8:38. He and the Son of Man together were the agents of Elohim's final intervention in human affairs. But Jesus does not speak only of himself when he refers to the Son of Man, because Jesus, an earthly Son of Man, saw himself as paired with Daniel's heavenly Son of Man. There is a sliding scale of reference. Sometimes Jesus thinks more of the one, at other times more of the other. This combined poetic usage is his own invention, the Son of Man as human and heavenly. Sometimes Jesus refers more to himself as the Son of Man, as when he complains that he and others have no place to lodge, while foxes and birds do. At other times, when he thinks of the final judgment in which the Son of Man is to be the agent, he refers more to the majesty of Daniel's vision. But at every point, the two references illuminate one another, because the Son of Man was for Yeshua both human and heavenly. The reality of the kingdom is attested in heaven and on earth, in both cases by the Son of Man. Hey, this is powerful. Who would have thought that any scholars could write something as powerful as this? When Yeshua is permitted to cease being a rational teacher of reasonable truth, and to become the paradoxical, poetic rabbi he more truly was, his message becomes clearer. His teaching is more challenged when it is so understood. Though it may be unbelievable to many people, it is nonetheless clearer within its historical context. Yeshua asserted that Elohim was acting as king, and he implicitly claimed that he alone knew how. His teaching and activities were designed to make his announcement concerning the kingdom as public as possible. That desire to publicize the kingdom is what caused Yeshua to send his disciples out in his name, and one aspect of his ministry that seems to make him unlike the other rabbis of this period. Jesus' reference to the Son of Man make explicit what his preaching about the kingdom of Elohim always implied. He claimed that he, a person like any other, or a Bar Enasha, the Son of Man in Aramaic, enjoyed access to the heavenly court through the angelic figure who was like a person, or a Kibar Enasha. The Son of Man of Daniel 7 confirms the words of the Son of Man who spoke to his disciples. Yeshua's claim was not that he was identical to the Son of Man, but that he was intimate with the Son of Man. It was a claim that was no more and no less audacious than his assertion that the kingdom of Elohim had arrived with his ministry. The Yeshua of history is not what the old liberalism would desire, a skilled interpreter of timeless truth. He is, rather, a demanding poet, seized by prophetic vision that overcomes him and those around him with its power. The two themes, the kingdom of Elohim and the Son of Man, imply one another. The kingdom is the public theme of Yeshua's ministry, what was spoken of openly and fully to anyone who would hear. The Son of Man was the esoteric theme, the explanation of how Yeshua could know what he did, directed at those who responded to the message of the kingdom. Many rabbis spoke of the visionary reality of Elohim's throne, which they usually referred to as the chariot, in the manner of the first chapter of Ezekiel. The vision of Daniel 7 is in part inspired by that passage in Ezekiel, which even speaks of, quote, something that seemed like a human form, unquote, seated on the throne. Ezekiel 1:26. Yeshua claimed that access to the heavenly Son of Man gave him, as a human Son of Man, his knowledge of the throne of Elohim. Jesus offered his contemporaries new insight into Elohim as king, on the basis that Yeshua's teaching concerning the kingdom would be confirmed by the Son of Man in heaven. That special relationship between Yeshua and the Son of Man permeates his teaching and accounts for the large number of sayings concerning the Son of Man in the Gospel. Of course, the insight into heaven that Yeshua taught was not just a repetition of what any rabbi might have taught. His teaching about the kingdom of Elohim and the Son of Man was distinctive. He explained why he knew about such matters, while other rabbis did not. Everything has been entrusted to me by my Father, and nobody is familiar with the Son except the Father, and nobody is familiar with the Father except the Son, and the one to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Matthew 11:27. This Son knows about the kingdom of Elohim and is especially associated with the Son of Man, who is installed beside the throne of Elohim. This Son is uniquely related to Elohim on the basis of what the Father reveals to him. He is the Son of Elohim by virtue of that revelation. Yeshua's claim to divine sonship is part and parcel of his teaching concerning the kingdom of Elohim and the Son of Man. Yeshua's death grievously disappointed the hopes of those who responded to his message of the kingdom, but for some of them, the disappointment proved to be momentary. The resurrection produced a conviction among the disciples that Yeshua was alive and had been vindicated by Elohim. He had been exalted to the heavenly throne of which he had spoken. An early authority who was crucial in the development of that conviction was James, Yeshua's brother, Yaakov. He was a key witness to the risen Yeshua, according to the testimony of Paul, the earliest writer to speak of Yeshua's resurrection. The New Testament itself doesn't record an appearance to James, but the apocryphal Gospel of the Hebrews does. There, Yeshua assures his brother that the Son of Man has been raised from among those who sleep. The authority of James, it seems, was a key force in the complete identification between Yeshua and the figure from Daniel 7 after the resurrection. Once that identification was made, it was natural for Yeshua's own sayings to be recast to refer consistently to his own authority, to his own treatment and suffering, to his own vindication. But his original parabolic speech still shines through the texts as they have been received. So again, who is this Son of Man? The Son of Man was Yeshua's way of talking about himself as a person who had access to the very throne of Elohim, the place of another angelic person. Yeshua took a classic passage from the Bible, in Daniel 7, blended it with an Aramaic idiom of his time, and related himself to the result. That was his characteristic manner of dealing with Scripture. Yeshua was not known for simply citing texts or commenting upon them, but for reshaping them in light of the kingdom. Originally, he developed an intriguing juxtaposition between, on the one hand, his own humanity, his own shared being as the Son of Man, and on the other hand, the heavenly person who sat beside Elohim's throne. Woven together with faith in Yeshua's resurrection, the fabric of the Gospels presents Yeshua himself as that heavenly figure, the messianic agent of final vindication, the Son of Man. An excellent article by Bruce Chilton from Bible Review, August 1996. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.